In 2012, Jason Fry published The Essential Guide to Warfare through Del Rey, and buried in its ship listings were specifications for 8 vessel classes most readers assumed had always existed in official Star Wars lore. The Assertor-class Star Dreadnought, the Bellator-class Star Battlecruiser, the Vigil-class Corvette, the Altor-class Fleet Support Ship, the Secutor-class Battle Carrier. All of them originated from the portfolio of one 3D artist, Ansel Xiao, online handle Fractal Sponge, who had been posting detailed renders of Imperial capital ships to his personal website since the early 2000s. Lucas Licensing approached him to provide artwork. He submitted his own designs. Author Jason Fry later confirmed in his Tumblr endnotes that the names and specifications had been approved by Lucasfilm. Just like that, Fanon became canon. If you saw the previous video on this channel, you know that story. This one covers the mirror of it. The ships Xiao kept building after 2012, the designs that never made the same jump, and whether they should have. The answer, for at least 3 of them, is yes. The argument isn't sentimental, it's structural. Xiao described his own design philosophy on his site in August 2017. "I'm a nerd. I mean a proper, hardcore nerd who cares about reactor volumes and power to weight, internal consistency to long-forgotten lore, armor grazing angles." That's not an artist describing aesthetic preferences. That's someone running a warship design practice and applying it to a fictional navy that had serious holes in it. The holes are the point. A standard Imperial sector group nominally comprised 2,600 warships. Of those, exactly 24 were Imperial-class Star Destroyers. The remaining 1,600-plus vessels were supposed to be the escort, logistics, and screening complement that made those ISDs function as a coherent fleet. In practice, the official Imperial Navy in both Legends and canon has almost nothing documented in those slots. Named logistics vessels with capital-scale capabilities? Nearly non-existent. Standard escort pairings for specialized ships like the Interdictor class? 0. The Tarkin doctrine pointed at ISDs as instruments of psychological terror. Massive, visible, overwhelming. Specialization undermined the image. But doctrine and reality aren't the same thing, and the battles of the Galactic Civil War repeatedly exposed gaps that doctrine was supposed to conceal. Fractal Sponge noticed. He wasn't writing complaints. He was building solutions. The first gap is the mid-weight warship slot, the space between light frigates and the 1,600-meter ISD hull. Fractal Sponge published design notes for the Proclamator class on September 5, 2018. Hull length, 889.6 meters. Power output, approximately 1.5 times 10 to the 24th power watts. His stated concept was a full warship equivalent to the Acclamator in the same design lineage. A heavy frigate maintaining visual and structural continuity from Republic service into the Imperial fleet. The design philosophy he documented is precise. When it came time to make a fast assault ship, he wrote, the designers took an existing warship hull design and stripped it down, like a rasée. A rasée is a sailing warship converted by removing its upper gun deck, keeping speed by cutting weight. He applied that logic directly. Heavy turbolasers stripped out, structural bracing removed, internal troop and vehicle storage reassigned from hangar volume. The result is a ship that reads as an Old Republic lineage vessel pressed into Imperial service. Familiar in profile, lighter on the line, capable of independent action with its own troops and fighter complement. At 889.6 meters, the Proclamator sits between the Dreadnought class at roughly 600 meters and what the Acclamator hull implied at 752. That bracket is the escort and rapid response role the Imperial Navy listed in its order of battle, but never filled with a named, documented class carrying this pedigree. The Star Wars Fanon Wiki lists it as a trending Imperial Starship entry, indicating sustained community adoption years after the design notes went up. The case for official status isn't that the Proclamator is spectacular. It's that it's exactly the kind of workhorse the fleet needed in the numbers the doctrine required. The second gap is sharper, and Fractal Sponge spent years on it. The Rebel Alliance's most recognizable escort vessel was the Nebulon B frigate, the medical ship hull from The Empire Strikes Back. Long, forked, awkward. It worked for the rebels because the Empire had decommissioned it from frontline service, and the Alliance acquired surplus hulls. But if the Nebulon B started life as an Imperial escort design, what did the original Imperial version actually look like before the rebels stripped it down? Fractal Sponge had an answer. His Imperial Nebulon Star Frigate project spans at least 5 documented WIP posts on fractalsponge.net, running from an initial concept through a structural update in April 2021. The design notes on that 5th WIP are the most revealing. The negative space right forward of the engine block in the original studio model looked like it had something large pulled out of that section. Since the available power/acceleration numbers of the Nebulon B in Rebel service seems to be pretty miserable, and we are operating under the assumption that the original Imperial version is more a proper escort and substantially less gimped than a 1200G fighter garage, I figured that the original had a much more impressive reactor system there, but this was stripped by the rebels and repurposed into more important ships. That's a designer reading documented absence into a canonical model and reconstructing what was removed. The hull includes an internal hangar with a carousel rack system, tractor beam turrets, a tactical sensor cluster, and a missile pod on the forward blade. Community reception has been sustained for years. A single gallery post of this design on r/Starship Porn pulled 636 upvotes. Direct comparison threads between Fractal Sponge's version and E.C. Henry's competing Nebulon B interpretation produced a community verdict that split precisely along technical lines. E.C. Henry's design is the most Imperial-looking one. I prefer Fractal Sponge's hangar system over E.C. Henry's, though. That's an audience that has absorbed both designs in sufficient detail to have a specific technical preference. The doctrine gap this fills is the one the Imperial Navy most visibly left open. The Interdictor-class Star Destroyer, Scianar Fleet Systems, 175 million credits, equipped with gravity well projectors that pulled ships from hyperspace, was armed with turbolasers that community analysis consistently describes as less than 1/3 the output of an Imperial class. The ship required fleet support to function tactically. Official sources across Legends and canon have never named a standard escort class assigned to screen interdictor operations. The community has noticed. Discussion threads repeatedly ask why interdictors were absent from Hoth, from key rebel supply interdictions, from situations where their gravity wells could have been decisive. The answer, to the extent the lore provides one, is that the Empire never documented what the escort was supposed to be. Fractal Sponge's Imperial Nebulon fits that slot exactly. A light turbolaser-armed frigate with fighter launch capacity, operating alongside an interdictor while the bigger ship holds its gravity well. Nothing in the official fleet occupies that specific role at that scale. The Lancer-class frigate was the Empire's named, dedicated anti-starfighter vessel. But it was so slow that Imperial Command eventually considered it a failure for fleet roles. Too expensive to see much more than sporadic deployment. It wasn't designed for the paired escort role the Interdictor needed. The Imperial Nebulon is the answer to a question the lore kept raising without resolving. The Imperial Nebulon's lore connection leads directly to a second documented inconsistency. This one involving the ships the Altor class was designed to service. The Altor, now officially licensed via the Essential Guide to Warfare, was described on Fractal Sponge's own site as built to fuel Star Dreadnoughts and Star Destroyer squadrons. Its 4,600-meter hull was sized for servicing a single executor equivalent, or an entire squadron of smaller ships. The Eclipse-class Star Dreadnought, 17.5 kilometers of Kuat Drive Yards engineering, the Emperor's personal superweapon, carried a Class II hyperdrive as its primary drive system. Class II means half the hyperspace speed of a Class I vessel. The Venator-class Star Destroyer from the Clone Wars era ran Class I. The Emperor's greatest warship was slower in hyperspace than Republic-era ships it was designed to replace, and slower than the Rebel X-Wings it was supposed to annihilate. A logistics vessel built to service star dreadnoughts in the field would need comparable hyperdrive capability to remain useful. The Altor had to accompany the fleet, not wait for it. The official specifications create a fleet train that can barely keep pace with the fleet it's supposed to support. Xiao built the Altor because the gap was real. The Eclipse hyperdrive made the gap embarrassing. The third gap is fighter coverage across secondary fleet operations. Fractal Sponge's renders of the Tunfalk-class escort carrier appear in his portfolio alongside the Vigil class and Gladiator class, secondary fleet vessels designed for the role the Secutor was too large and expensive to fill across a full sector group. The Secutor ran 200 million credits per hull, carried 40,000 crew, and measured 2.2 kilometers. A flagship-scale carrier, not a convoy escort. For the patrol routes, cargo protection, and anti-piracy work that made up the actual daily operations of most Imperial fleet elements, something cheaper and more numerous was necessary. Official doctrine acknowledges that escort carriers existed to inexpensively provide additional fighter support to secondary fleets and cargo convoys. The doctrine is documented. The definitive vessel design for it, at the specification quality Xiao brings, isn't. A note worth making here. A Tunfalk class designation does appear in some Legends-adjacent sources, which means Xiao may be providing a visual realization of an existing designation rather than a wholly original invention. That actually strengthens the case for official adoption. There's a named slot in the lore waiting for a design capable of filling it, and his is the most technically rigorous candidate available. The Secutor itself surfaces one more inconsistency that the fanon community has been chewing on for years. Wikipedia describes the Secutor as possibly the largest dedicated starfighter carrier in the Imperial Navy. At 2.2 kilometers, it's more than twice the length of the Venator class. The Venator carried 420 starfighters. The Secutor's official complement is listed at 144. Fractal Sponge addressed this directly in comments on his site. I'm not sure where people came up with that number. The Venator can hold 2 to 3 times that many fighters, and it's around 1/5 the volume of the Secutor by my rough estimate. Even accounting for living space for pilots, the Secutor should easily hold over 500 fighters. The math is straightforward. Volume scales with the cube of linear dimension. A 2.2 kilometer hull has dramatically more internal volume than a 1 kilometer hull. A figure of 144 fighters on that vessel isn't a tactical choice. It's a number someone wrote down without running the calculation. His own renders of the Secutor, the renders that got him into the Essential Guide to Warfare, show an expanded hangar layout that makes volumetric sense. He fixed the official stats with geometry. Beyond Fractal Sponge himself, the community he sits at the peak of has been doing this work for decades. Fan artist E.C. Henry operates in the same technical interpretation space, producing renders that generate genuine comparison debate. A community-compiled visual guide project noted that designers like these painstakingly study the language and unwritten rules of Star Wars design, working within them to create memorable and iconic starships. The FFG forum thread, Ship Stats, Fractal Sponge's Imperial capital ships, opened in February 2017, documents years of community effort to formalize game statistics for Xiao's capital ships, treating them as canonical equivalents for tabletop play. That's not appreciation for art. That's a community asserting that the designs belong in the order of battle. Now for the verdict. The ranking framework covers 5 criteria: the size of the fleet doctrine gap filled, the uniqueness of the role, with no existing official ship filling it, the quality of technical documentation, community reception and longevity, and whether the design resolves a documented lore inconsistency. The Proclamator class scores well on documentation and community adoption, but the mid-weight warship gap is partially covered by other Legends vessels. The Tunfalk escort carrier fills a real gap, but may be completing an existing Legends designation, rather than creating a new one. The Imperial probe ship fills a unique reconnaissance role, but lacks the documented specifications to make the technical case fully. The Imperial Nebulon star frigate wins across every criterion that matters. Doctrine gap. The dedicated fleet escort role, specifically close protection for Interdictor-class cruisers, is documented as absent from official Imperial Order of Battle sources. No named vessel fills it. The gap isn't just theoretical. It helps explain why interdictors appear so rarely in the decisive battles of the Galactic Civil War. Operationally exposed whenever they deployed without dedicated escort, and the official fleet never codified what that escort was supposed to be. Role uniqueness. Nothing in the official fleet fills this slot. The Lancer class was too slow and too narrowly focused. The Vigil-class corvette, now officially licensed, operates in the picket role at smaller scale. The Imperial Nebulon fills the escort frigate with carrier capability bracket, sized for independent patrol and task force support, at a scale and with a capability set that nothing in canon or legends occupies. Technical documentation. Xiao documented this design across at least 5 WIP posts spanning from an initial concept through April 2021, each with structural notes and specific design decisions stated on the record. The internal hangar with carousel rack system, tractor beam turrets, and tactical sensor cluster are all documented on the record. He documented his reasoning for each design departure from the canonical studio model. He even explained where the mass went. Community reception. 636 upvotes on a single r/Starship porn post. Sustained comparison threads. Years of discussion spanning multiple WIP updates. An audience that knows the design well enough to have a specific technical preference for its hangar system over a competitor's. Lore inconsistency resolved. The Interdictor deployment problem. A ship that requires fleet support to be effective has no defined fleet support in official sources, and disappears from the order of battle at the exact moments it should be most useful. The Imperial Nebulon closes that contradiction. Deployed alongside an interdictor, it provides the anti-starfighter screen and close escort the Gravity Well ship needs to operate without getting killed by the fighters it just pulled out of hyperspace. Without something like it, the interdictor remains exactly what the lore made it: expensive, specialized, and consistently underdeployed. The 2012 licensing decision proved the window existed. 8 of Xiao's designs went through it. The Imperial Nebulon wasn't finished yet. The Proclamator was still accumulating community interest. The window closed when the Essential Guide to Warfare went to print, and the ships still on the drafting table stayed there. Fractal Sponge kept building anyway. Power generation is the most important metric for a warship, he wrote on his site. Power gets turned into weapons fire, acceleration, and shielding. Everything that a warship actively does depends on how much power it generates. The official Imperial Navy left the power budget unaccounted for across several critical doctrine slots. These designs filled it in. That's not fan art as wishful thinking. That's completion work, done, in several cases, better than the source material managed. Subscribe for more stories like this.